Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Desiree Dembski-Hamlin, and I'm Deputy Director at the Freedom's Way National Heritage Area. Before we get started, I would like to introduce our Executive Director, Patrice Tedisco, who will now say a few words.
Thank you, Desiree. I just simply wanted to welcome everyone to the webinar, say how excited to be spending this time with you, look forward to your questions, and now I'm going to turn it back to Desiree, who's going to do the introduction.
Thank you, Patrice. Welcome to Engaging Youth and Family Audiences at Your Site, the second in the three-part webinar series, Heritage in Action, Engaging the Next Generation Through Educational Programs and Activities. Offered by the Freedom's Way National Heritage Area, the series is designed to support cultural, environmental, and history organizations in developing and sustaining education programs for school audiences. A recommendation developed through a comprehensive assessment of the educational opportunities available to students within the 45 communities of the Heritage Area, which was conducted for Freedom's Way by Elizabeth Nevins of Seed Education Consulting. Freedom's Way collaborates with people, organizations, and the communities of the Heritage Area to facilitate and promote preservation, conservation, and educational initiatives. Our efforts inspire residents and visitors to value and engage with our landscapes, histories, and cultures, and the principles underlying freedom and democracy. These webinars explore strategies to engage youth, a population that is critically important to the well-being and long-term stewardship of the Heritage Area and its natural, cultural, and historical resources. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with registrants following each session. Additional educational resources and templates will be available on the Freedom's Way website for all to access in the coming weeks. Each session is closed captioned. Please place your questions in the chat as they arise, and they'll be answered as appropriate throughout the session. We'd like to extend a hearty thanks to the advisory committee whose expertise and experience guided this project. We're deeply grateful for their support. The committee was composed of Julie Burnson, Director of Learning at the Trustees, Carolyn Collins, Education Program Manager for Historic New England, Denise LeBlanc, Vice President and Program Chair of the Friends of Pinehawk, Catherine Parent, Program Coordinator for the Department of Conservation and Recreation's Division of Water Supply, and Hannah Wolf, Education Coordinator for the Lexington Arts and Crafts Society. And I will now turn it over to Elizabeth Nevins of Seed Ed Consulting and today's speakers, Robert Keeney, Director of Exhibits at the USS Constitution Museum, and Chris Skopenik, Senior Director of Education and Engagement at Mass Audubon. Elizabeth?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Desiree and Patrice, for having us and inviting our wonderful speakers to come talk today about our subject, which I will share really quickly some framing for our session, which is about working with family audiences. We spoke last week, if you were able to join us, about working with school groups, and this is another wonderful way to engage youth is by inviting them with their families to come and visit your site, or in some ways, sometimes going out to other places to engage with them. And so I've invited Robert and Chris to come and speak with us today about the ways in which they are engaging with families at their organizations. And I'm confessing this actually didn't happen on purpose when the planning team came together and thought of some ideas to who to invite. But I spent a lot of time with my child at both the USS Constitution and many of the Mass Audubon sites. So my family has spent time in these places. So I know that we've had very engaging interactions, and so I'm really excited to have them come and share some of their expertise with you all. So the way we're going to do this today is we're going to talk through kind of three topics, and I have them listed here: finding where mission and families meet, elements of successful programs, and planning for multi-generational dynamics. We're going to kind of move through those topics with Chris and Robert sharing some of their best practices and hot tips around the ways in which they engage with families. And then I will throw up some kind of big takeaways from that we've talked about in advance, and we'll likely do questions. So if you throw those in the chat after each section, so we don't have to wait until the end to do questions. And before we start, and before I ask my first question, I wanted to address two things. I was thinking of these on my walk this morning. One of them was, um, we're going to throw around the word family and we're going to throw around the word multi-generational or intergenerational. And I think that's really speaking to the idea that families come in all shapes and sizes, and they come in all kinds of formations. And so when we're talking about families, we're talking about a little and a big coming together to your site. And something I'll share is a really great resource around family inclusive language that has been developed for museums and cultural sites and nature sites. That will be part of something that we share. So thinking about the language that we use when we are engaging with families is certainly important. And I'm also going to throw out that we're not going to talk about camp today. I know Chris is like just coming out of camp season. Camp is like a whole other beast because it's a drop-off program. And what we're really talking about today is inviting, again, a big and a little, a grown up and a young person together, and how we can really facilitate engagement with what makes our site unique with that group. And maybe we can do a whole other, I'll talk to Patrice about, we could do a whole other program about camp because that's very different. So I wanted to throw it out to the two of you as a way of introducing yourselves and your organizations. The first real question is, if you could kind of contextualize what family programming looks like. We talk about mission, and your organizations have specific things that you do and you're trying to achieve, and kind of what's the intersection with families and your mission, and how are you kind of finding that overlap? And I don't know, Robert, if you want to jump in.
Okay, so yes, from the Constitution Museum's perspective back, we began to realize that we were a stuffy museum that was more for adults than, and yet we had lots of kids coming back in the early 2000s. And we realized that when we did a survey, we realized that our majority of our audience were families, and in specifically, because of the nature of the Freedom Trail, families with children in grade school. Because that's who walks the Freedom Trail for the most part. So we realized that was the biggest chunk of our audience, and we at that point we applied for a national leadership grant from IMLS and around family learning in exhibits, and then we followed it up with a second national leadership grant specifically about family learning in programs, and that pivoted the whole organization to say, boy, our main audience is families. And we did use a really broad definition of families to be intergenerational, whether that is sort of parent-child or even, or of course, grandparent-child or even parent-grandparent, but any intergenerational group. And some of the things that we've done for families, especially in the exhibits, we found have actually worked as well for older people as well. So seating works great for everybody. So there's some universals in there, but that's become a real focus for the museum, and it's been very helpful for us. There's the short version. And I'll hand it off to Chris.
All right, thank you. So that was really interesting to hear kind of your journey. I've been with Mass Audubon for now, I think 23 years. And I think Mass Audubon is, for those of you who know the organization, we have a long history of offering family programs at our network of wildlife sanctuaries that have nature centers. At the same time, we're a conservation organization, so we, as an organization, participate in land conservation, environmental, and climate advocacy. And then, of course, so we have these education programs, and education has a very specific role. The role in the organization is to increase kind of connection to nature, to help people of all ages kind of understand how nature and natural systems work. And when we're really knocking it out of the park, we're helping to activate them as people who care about the environment and want to protect the environment. So we have like a specific, there's a means to the end beyond just learning and development. We also think about our education programs as on-ramps to helping people think about becoming a Mass Audubon member. We think about them as a core way of building trust with Mass Audubon as an organization. So a little bit, Elizabeth, it warms my heart that you have those fond memories. That's kind of what we're after. We want people to think about Mass Audubon as if you want to learn about the environment, you want to think about what it means to have meaningful experiences in nature, like think about Mass Audubon as a resource for that. And then, our curriculum is our landscapes. So, wherever you are, whether it's at Wellfleet Bay or Droneland Farm, or Pleasant Valley, out in the Berkshires, we let the landscapes kind of do the talking. So, depending on what habitats we have there and the wildlife that live there, what season it is, we design our curriculum to help like nature come alive, for families, for parents, caregivers, children, just like you said, kind of all ages. So we really let nature kind of guide us, in terms of what our program portfolio looks like for these audiences.
That's great. So, and kind of jumping off that, I it was always obvious when I would go to a Mass Audubon program, kind of what we were gonna, do on any given day. And Robert, I think it's kind of interesting to think, I mean, your USS like War of 1812, like what does that have to do with families? And I know we have some folks on the call today who are at, smaller historical organizations that might be kind of wondering, like, what is it about my site that's gonna be family friendly? And so I'm curious if you could kind of share how you've been making that leap.
Yeah, I mean, I would say a couple of things that we looked at our content and looked at the content that would actually appeal to families. So, universals are one thing. Food, aboard ship is fascinating to people, and how you sleep and live aboard ship is, of course, fascinating to people. And plenty of people have historic sites where they may also have things, similar content that I think is like fascinating to adults and children out of the gate. Animals are great, as Mass Audubon, I'm sure knows. But so, with those stories that are about animals aboard Constitution, they sort of floated to the top of the list. And then we started to integrate more science into our exhibits too, because we looked at, one of the things we looked at was actually where kids are in grade school. So gameplay, there's science education, the math, like where they're actually at. And many of those things, parents, like, they're also a little loose on some of those scientific concepts. So we found that's been a sweet spot too. And it's a place where our big content about USS Constitution and the War of 1812 somehow still connects to concepts that are important today. Now, I would love them to think about international trade of 1812 and 1812 and today. That would be awesome. And I do try and do a little bit of that, but I know that like the dog that was aboard Constitution is going to be way more successful. So,
I love that.
And Chris, do you similarly have, thinking about content, that balance of content and fun, and like, is it? I think when we last week in our school programs webinar, certainly talking about, curriculum standards and such was definitely a hot topic. But in thinking about family programs, like what's that balance really in terms of kind of, content and whether that's kind of like mission content or if
Yeah.
it's,
I was just thinking, of of course you want them to learn something, right? But if those families are going to come back, it better be fun and engaging. Because if the kids are bored, the parents, the caregivers are going to be less likely to be like, let's sign up for another one, which we all know is like kind of what you want out of the whole deal. I think about, like you said, the curriculum and the programming kind of pours out of our sites. And it is. We're like just, like Robert described, we're teaching about habitats, we're talking about animals and what are their adaptations and what kinds of, unique behaviors do they have and why do you find this bird here versus this bird there or maple sugaring? Where's all this maple sap coming from? And so that's all very engaging. But what we're trying to do from a design perspective is how do we make it so that they are not just walking in nature, like how are we getting them to see something or experience something? A little bit of immersion, like let us help you see something that you wouldn't see if you weren't spending the time with us today. We want to make it so that this idea of an experience is really important. Families are super busy. And they don't, and there's all sorts of great self-guided opportunities out there, or you can use technology to augment just a walk in nature. So we're constantly trying to assess our programs, which are the ones that really kind of turn the knob up on experience. Like you just had that experience because you were with one of our teacher naturalists. You could come again and also have a very cool experience through a scavenger hunt or a nature bingo or a quest pack. But that experience you just had was because you were someone who really understands what kind of critters live in the wetland ecosystem, or really understands, what birds live in this forest. And so we're just trying to help them bring our expertise to the experience. Does that make sense? I mean, just really make it really have a unique flavor for them when they're out in nature.
Yeah. And Robert, do you at Constitution, I know you are kind of particularly involved in exhibits and creating kind of those self-guided experiences. What's the role of facilitator? Do you have facilitators that you're working with and thinking
So we,
about?
right.
Yeah.
So we do, we do drop-in family programs. So our, the thing that we have is almost 300,000 visitors a year streaming through the museum. So, for a little museum, that's gigantic. So, we have some facilitators in the gallery, and then that at certain times, and then we do programming as drop-in programming because we're not going to be able, unlike where Audubon is, we're, what you could go to the website and say, I'm going to be there for a 1 o'clock program. People are walking Freedom Trail. We don't know when they're going to get here. If there's an opportunity for a family to go right into a program because they're here and maybe they're at your site for something else, then they're going to do it. And then we try to be respectful, like the program isn't too long, and it's got something for everybody. Like it's very much, our programs are designed for our audience, right? They're designed for those people who are walking through. So, and as while I'm in charge of exhibits, we're not that big, so we get involved in, all of us get involved in stuff. So, I can give program examples at some point if you want.
We'll get to that now.
Elizabeth, can I add to that a little bit? Because Robert, what,
Absolutely.
what you're describing is very interesting because, the amount of time that I've been at Mass Audubon, we've certainly seen some of our program participation drop a little bit, the pre-registration, and we're seeing people register for programs later and later, and then show up for programs that we've advertised as pre-registration, seeing if they can get into the program. So, again, it's the world is changing and how people think about how far ahead they're planning for activities. So we're even starting to, at our most popular sanctuaries, nature centers, we're trying to look at, all right, we have to have, a staff on hand, who can maybe hop in to expand the participation in a program we already have on the books. Because we've had programs where we've increased our participants by up to 10 or 12 with walk-ins, and that's within that's probably within the last 2 to 3 years that we've really seen that shift and have had to accommodate for just how people are planning out their days, weekends, evenings even. So it's definitely a shift in the in this world
Yeah.
of what we call public programs for youth and families.
That's really interesting. Just in terms of thinking of very practical things for
Yes.
folks who are
Yeah.
trying to jump
It struck
into
me that
this.
Robert's just there. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I could have talked to Robert and learned this 5 years ago.
Well, I think that's the nature of our audience, and I'm sure other
Yeah,
people
yeah.
are an
It's
audience.
just interesting. It's good.
Yeah.
You're ready for whatever comes your way. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely a practical consideration as folks are considering doing public programs, is that it's going to be a learning curve, figuring out who your audience is, who's going to
Mhm.
come, how you can keep them coming if that's one of your goals. If you just want to start small with I'm sure I when I was going to Mass Audubon, we were doing a weekly class with
Mhm.
shout out to Miss Annette. I don't know if she's still there anymore, but she's a seminal figure in my daughter's childhood. But so if you're looking to build towards something like that, I think for folks just getting their toes wet in this world, kind of trying things and not getting too not taking it personally, that it's going to kind of take a minute to kind of find your spot. And I think Robert, you pointed something out at the very beginning, which was we were noticing something, and so then we did a survey. we took we
Yeah,
could
no,
we did
that's
an
true.
evaluation, and I'm certainly not implying that folks should like go out there and do some comprehensive evaluation, but I think always being curious and asking questions as much as possible of the folks, who you see who are participating, or the folks who maybe aren't participating, but just kind of, being observant of what's happening out there and trying to collect information that's going to help you focus and refine where you're going.
And I would assume, like we have special programs for school vacation weeks, which is also often a good place for smaller organizations to start because there's extra demand those times, those
Doesn't
weeks.
have to be camp. It can just be a couple of morning programs,
That's
right?
right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, exactly.
Or a
If you
giant
have
amount of
questions.
Legos. For us, we have a Lego gallery. We do a Lego gallery in the wintertime, for
Yeah.
winter break.
All right. So again, if anyone has questions, please throw those into the chat. I am going to just kind of do a quick um, share of some of the takeaways from this kind of first part of our maybe. Ooh, I can't. Sorry. So many windows open. Here we go. So, just some of the takeaways from what we were chatting about. It's definitely about your content is key. It's what makes you unique, but you've got to know your family audience, and we're going to dive into family audience a little more next. Um, as Chris was in both Chris and Robert were saying, what can you only see or do at your site? How can you really capitalize on that unique experience? You do have an opportunity potentially for repeat visitation, whether it's seasonal. Chris was talking about maple sugaring in the late winter, fall leaves, spring peepers, um, and or sometimes it's something. I know at USS Constitution, there's a lot of fun things going on the ship, which is not part of the museum, but next door. And so capitalizing on 4th of July events and different events that are happening to kind of turn programming into potentially kind of a family tradition, that you do once or twice a year. And to include activities that are not part of what most people regularly get to see or observe, which I love that. It's kind of the behind the scene. If I've learned anything in my years working in museums, the behind the scenes is always a hot ticket for folks to kind of feel like they're getting something special out of their experience.
Yeah.
So I'm going to slide us over to talking a little bit about kind of what are the key elements of a successful family program? And so thinking about, what are maybe I'll have you each maybe share a couple of examples of some programs that have been particularly successful with multi-generational audiences. And then perhaps we can kind of pick that apart and think about what are some universals that people might be able to take away as they're thinking about how to do this work at their own sites. So I don't know, Chris, if you want to talk a little bit about some of the programs that you found to be great.
Yeah. I want to go back to this idea of when we say program, it can mean so many different things. Like there's a continuum, and it is all the way from, having something that helps just support the visit. Again, whether that's what we have these nature bingo cards, or we have quest packs where there's a map that they can follow that is more kind of intergenerational friendly, and there may be a magnifying glass and a few prompts for careful observation. That doesn't require a staff member, but again, we're just trying to create a program within a self-guided visit, if you will. But some of our, I think, richest programs that are family programs are where we are, again, creating these immersion experiences and teaching skills to the caregivers at the same time. You do have to modulate your content. We're not going to go very deep into all just like birds of prey adaptations. We are going to talk about specific birds of prey adaptations because that's interesting to kids as well, and we can do that in a kid friendly way. But we are, you do kind of cap your content at a certain point so that you hold on to your youngest participants while holding on to your older participants. So we're always trying to think about, again, complementing the content with how can we teach this parent, caregiver, adult in this child's life with how they can extend this after the program so that they feel more comfortable coming back and doing these activities again. So it's a little bit of like you're teaching this program and then you're also kind of leaning, and you could do it this way. Let me help you how you can facilitate learning. And it really takes a special kind of instructor to be able to, manage that dance for learners at different developmental stages. So I just wanted to, just this idea of both providing the content that's engaging and experiential and very hands-on, and also thinking about where in here am I pulling in the skills building and increasing the comfort level of the caregiver. So they'll come again and they'll do this on their own, which is really what we're after. We want them to come back and be able to share nature with their children on their own, even without us. Yes, we want them to come back, but the big idea is you'll just spend more time outside. You'll continue to be curious about the natural world.
Great. So can I poke you a little? Is there a
Totally.
program in specific that you could think about? I know you're probably don't
Yeah,
get to do as much on the floor
I know, but no, there
teaching
too.
as
I
you would
mean,
like to. You,
yeah, I started at Mass Audubon at Drumlin Farm, which is probably one of our more popular sites. And so there's a specific program called Pollywogs and Frogs. You get the drift. Frogs and pollywogs, depending on who comes first. And that is a parent-child program. And it's very specifically designed to be parent slash caregiver child. The idea of what comes with that one-on-one time on a weekly basis, again, kind of learning about different habitats, and learning about the skills to become better observers of nature together, young child and parent. And then there was a whole series that kind of would graduate from Pollywogs and Frogs. And then that also was complemented by something we called Family Nature Program, which was again an 8-week series these are the programs that we hear. I came to family nature class. I went to Pollywogs and Frogs. They become campers in our day camps. They become adults that become more engaged with Mass Audubon. So family nature program is also another kind of it's a touch point. It would be like every Wednesday afternoon or every Saturday morning, explore a different habitat, explore the creatures that live there, and learn about learn how you can become better observers of nature, and then kind of build skills along the way. So those are two programs that really employ those strategies that I was describing earlier that have been successful for as long as I have been at Mass Audubon. So it's a little telling too. Yeah.
that's great. Um, yeah, I feel like the kids are easy. It's the parent or the adult, and the who sometimes you have to manage.
Yeah,
Robert,
just enough, like, just enough to stay busy. Again, it is really like a Goldilocks kind of just right. And we have instructors that do that well, that can kind of wear both of those hats, but it's also about scaffolding it with activities that help them build their skills at the same time, or having other resources available so that they can dig deeper into the content. Because you're not going to go on a treatise about, why the feathers are the anatomical shape that they are, when you have 3 or 4 year olds in the program too. Yeah.
that's great. Robert, any examples that you can share?
Yes, I have a couple, although I spent a lot of time when my kids were little at Drumlin Farms. It's funny how there's things that are the same but different. Our 85% or more of our visitors are one-time visitors. We'll never see them again. So our goal is for them to have like a surprisingly awesome experience at the Constitution Museum, because they're they're going back to wherever they're from, and I'm not going to see, no matter, even if they wanted to come back, they can't afford another plane ticket. It's a different goal, you know. Two programs that have been very successful for us and have some elements that are similar that have to do with bringing in the whole audience. One is a build a ship, which started off as inspired by rain gutter regatta for Boy Scouts, if anybody, or Cub Scouts, if anybody's familiar with that, where we get families do it as a group, and then they compete against other families, and um, they use aluminum foil and popsicle sticks and a little paper. And you have to buy your materials. You have to figure out your budget for your materials. And then you build a boat and it gets pushed down the track with a fan, and you see whether your boat makes it to the end. And there's a competitive aspect. So the competitive aspect is very helpful. We sometimes assign roles to people in order to get the whole family involved in a way that's constructive rather than just one member taking over. Um, and that's a huge thing. And we packaged that program both as a school program, as a drop-in program, as a holiday program. It's a top seller. Very, been fun for us for a while. And then there's a little fire a cannon, Alka-Seltzer cannon program. Very simple. Old plastic film canisters and an Alka-Seltzer tablet and a little water. But when facilitators do it, what's awesome we have some awesome facilitators. They assign each member of the family a different role on the gun crew. So part of the historic message is, boy, it took a lot of people to operate a gun. It's a simple chemical reaction, and you're familiar with chemical reactions. And there's this aspect of pressure. So there's sort of like this scientific stuff, and then there's this historic stuff, and then there's the role play. And role play for us is pretty useful. So if you have a young kid and they can be, the youngest person and can be the person getting the powder bag and carry, and then we have, well, okay, if somebody needs to lift up our cannonball, because we have a real cannonball that you lift up, and okay, that dad can lift up the cannonball, and then maybe mom is captain of the gun crew. Anyway, so we work on those roles, and give everybody roles so that everybody has something to do and the family is collaborating together rather than here's something you could do, and the parent jumps in to do it for the child, or the child does it, and the parent like sits there with the cell phone. But we find that when we do give out those roles and get everybody involved, everybody has a better time. People get much more into it. So those are two. Yeah, that's two examples.
That's great. Yeah, the idea of creating tasks, and I imagine you do that as well in some form, Chris, with your programs where the parent is not just everybody gets a job. So that's great. So it was interesting, Robert, you brought something up, which we also talked about in advance, this idea of thinking about materials and kind of what we're giving people and how we can make mindful choices as we're creating programs around the materials we use. I thought that was interesting that and I think, Chris, you mentioned this in our notes, the idea that like asking people to pay for things is not necessarily a bad thing, and
yeah, that in the build a boat, just to be clear, is fake money.
Okay.
It's a resource management aspect to the game. So that it also does save us from people grabbing too many materials, right? Like because aluminum foil costs money, so there is that motivation, but it also is you only have this much to spend. You're gonna have to make choices.
All right, but that also applies to people developing programs, you have to get supplies and you only have so much money. So, certainly something that we've talked about too was thinking about what resources you have to dedicate to this kind of programming, whether that's people resources, and we've talked a lot about facilitators, people who are going to kind of, if left to their own devices, there's many kind of ways in which maybe the family is not going to engage engaged in the role of the facilitator in kind of ensure. I think there's program design and designing the roles into it, but also the facilitator kind of making things clear in terms of what you want folks doing, and supporting them as they do that, answering questions. So thinking about your people resources, thinking about financial resources that you might need in terms of having materials available, and also thinking about trying not to be wasteful as much as possible. I think that's definitely something that we try to do. And I don't know if Chris, you in particular, and I mean, Robert, I think you're talking about some very simple, it doesn't have to be expensive and involve a lot of complicated parts, that it can be aluminum foil and popsicle sticks. And, Chris, I don't know if you have any thoughts. I know that sustainability is certainly a value of Mass Audubon, and how that might manifest in your program development.
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly made some choices about what materials we use, kind of based on making more sustainable choices. I mean, again, we're pretty lucky that, the kind of the curriculum is all around us. I mean, what's expensive for us are usually the tools that we use. If we're ponding, we want, ponding is kind of like finding aquatic water creatures in a wetland ecosystem, in a wetland habitat. We want good materials. If we want kids to see what they look like up close, to be able to actually learn how to identify them, we need a pretty decent field scope, and those things cost money. We think pretty carefully about which programs we charge for and which programs we don't charge for. So for people who are walking onto our properties, we have things we call visitor experiences. And so for a site like Drumlin or Trailside at Blue Hills, people can come to those properties, those nature centers, and they can experience what we call kind of visitor experiences or encounters. And those programs are free, if you're a member, or with an admission price. But then we have, like, again, this continuum but then you sign up for a program, and those programs are fee-based. And we're not trying to, make a ton of net revenue off of those programs, but we're really trying to price them to cover our costs, because those are taught by paid instructors. Because again, we want to make sure that the volume requires that we have staff available. So that requires that we know that they're going to show up if people sign up for that program. And the best way to do that is to provide compensation for that staff member's time. And that just might, for us, be an issue of scale. If you're a much smaller site, you probably likely can build up a crew of volunteers that are skilled enough to do that, and they're reliable enough that when they're going to show up. For us, it's a little bit harder at scale, especially for a site like Drumlin or Wellfleet Bay. We tend to have our instructors be paid employees, paid teacher naturalists. Also, the content sometimes requires that. We want to make sure that they're trained up on the content, or can explore a habitat safely, or can work with an animal in a safe way. They need to be trained on that animal. So again, I do think the work that we do in these quote unquote informal education contexts is really important. I think the skills that people have are really valuable. I'm a lifelong environmental educator. I value my expertise and my time. I know that some people feel like, oh, we can't charge for the programs. I feel like until we start charging for programs, it's really hard to make the case that what we're doing is really valuable. It's valuable to people in their lives. It's valuable to families. It's valuable to communities. So I feel really strongly that this continuum exists. Some things are free because we want to make sure that access is there, and other programs are intensive enough that we ought to charge for them because they are valuable. And that's how we determine value in our world. And again, I mean, it's cliche, but no one complains about $20 for a movie. And some of our best naturalists are giving people way more. That something, to my mind, is much more valuable than going to see a movie in terms of the experience that they're curating. So, and we're way cheaper than $20 for a 2-hour program. So I feel good about that. And where we're able to generate revenue, then we're able to then reinvest that in making sure that that price point isn't becoming an economic barrier to families who can't afford that. So we have a system for ensuring that we can provide financial access where it's needed, either through a sliding scale, kind of a tiered pricing program, or through actual financial aid. So that one was a little bit long-winded, but it is, we're putting a lot of thought into when we're charging, when we're not charging, and being mindful of also ensuring economic access to programming.
Great. I don't know, Robert, if you have anything. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I would say we're on the opposite end of the spectrum in that, our programs are our drop-in programs are, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, boom, 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 quick. And our goal for revenue for those programs is really to increase the amount of money that people give to the museum. Like that's it. We're not going to collect extra money for those programs, or if we do, it's going to be we have done some, but it's been a very small fee because we're families on the Freedom Trail asking them to spend an extra $5 a person starts to add up really fast. So, on the other hand, if every few families puts an extra 10 in the donation box, those, and we're doing 10-minute programs, then, it works out for us. I think it's because of the different natures of our audience. And I know the participants, I'm sure the folks watching, they each have their own situation to think about. And there's all options are on the table,
Again, and that
Yeah.
idea of experimenting and trying and seeing what works. So I am going to slide us over to our next topic, but first, again, questions. Love your questions if you have them. And I'll just kind of and there's one topic we didn't quite talk about, but that I will go over really quickly, and we can kind of slide that over into our next topic. Focus on fun. I think that's pretty much a given. And as we were talking about building skills for the parents, kind of building that into the activity itself. And again, this ties also to Robert's, ask people what they want. So meeting your guests, your audience where they are, finding out what's new to them, what's exciting to them, and building off of that. And something that I recommend is kind of just getting to know your family audience, do some research, connect with staff and observe programs at other sites, kind of keep your eyes open, ask your kids, your grandkids what they're up to with their littles, go visit other sites. I would say you guys so kindly agreed to come on our webinar. I think people in this field are very, very happy to share and share, kind of give you some good ideas. And another idea too is really partner with someone who's already attracting this audience. Libraries are my favorite place, and I think they just really have amazing resources and are thinking about family audiences in great ways. And I know within Freedom's Way, there's a lot of libraries who are already partnering with sites. Also, if you have youth or scouting groups in the community, bringing them in, relying on the expertise of the scout leaders, or they've got the badge book, figuring out what you need to do. That's a great way to kind of get your feet wet without maybe, investing heavily in one specific thing as a, kind of, it's, your built-in focus groups, right? So I'm hoping that we can talk now a little bit about, dive in a little more specifically into engaging the multi-generational dynamic. I think we've, touched on this idea that you can have situations where the parent is trying to do everything, or situations where they're on their phone and not engaged at all, and you're kind of a babysitter. And so how can we provide folks with some really more specific examples of how they are, how you're building those kind of little moments? I mean, Robert, you talked a lot about roles. So is anything else you want to throw in there?
Yeah, roles are really helpful. Obviously, you're thinking about your content as being content that's appealing to both kids and families. There's some other things that are interesting about skills in that there are skills, lots of skills that kids and parents are much more equal for than not. So space, if I have a physical puzzle. I think this is in the exhibit category, but this also there are programs that take advantage of this as well. Kids are way better at puzzles than parents are. So especially spatial relations, right? Kids tend to be just better at kind of thinking a little bit broader, and they often have an easier time with puzzles. So that can be a way of leveling the playing field where kids and adults can both participate and have an equal. So we try and think about like, what do we do? What's the program doing such that it works well for parents and adults? And is this content maybe foreign to both so that they're both learning? Is this skill equally difficult for both kids and adults? So is it like, so what can we do in the program to put the child and the parent on equal footing? So I think those are a couple ways. I think there's others too that you can, there's other things you can do too. Content that's unfamiliar to both can be helpful, right? Because they don't know, neither of them has an answer. So the parent doesn't have to be the teacher. The facilitator can be the teacher. We think about that. That's something to consider. So those are a few. That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, that's like let the parent like I mean you have to kind of encourage the parent caregiver to kind of like, okay, sit back, we've
We
got
got
you.
this.
Like, we've got you. You can have fun too. You
Yeah.
can participate too. I love how you described trying to think about what are the activities that help get them on equal footing and maybe also trading expertise, right? So like when you
Yeah.
describe the puzzle, it's like, and I always love that when in our teacher naturalists that are good at pointing that out to the
Yeah.
adults, right? And
Yeah.
same goes for nature exploration. Like it's really great to like a nature scavenger hunt, or what do you notice about what we're looking at here, and all the things that young, curious minds will come up with. And
Yeah.
again, as a teacher, as a facilitator, in that moment, to really highlight that. Like, it's so incredible. Whenever I'm out here with kids, you always help me see all these new things. You are so great at observing. Did you know that observation is critical to being a good scientist? And you see like the adult brains like, oh, maybe I should encourage that open-ended observation a little bit more. It's a little bit of like helping them realize that like these young people that you get to hang out with are amazing. And they can also help you learn. So like there's that equal footing, you're both learning. And then there's this like, adults may be a little bit better at doing this activity, and you're kind of scaffolding it for the young person in this program, and vice versa. Young people really are going to jump into this in this activity, and
Yeah.
we invite you to participate in them leading you in this learning. Again, it takes a lot of practice and talent to do that well, but it's so sweet to see that learning happening, in tandem at the same time, and both of, and just seeing that relationship of the family changing as a result of it. I mean, I don't need to make it like any more magical than families learning together already is, but it is really spectacular to curate that being able to happen where everyone's just really having fun together, learning about new material and diving in. So I just think it's a special thing that organizations like ours get to do. Like kids don't get to learn with their parents in school. They
Yeah.
also don't get to learn with their parents and other adults that are meaningful to them in camp because it's drop off. Like, so designing these programs to really leverage that is what makes them special because the whole family gets to do it. So it's being intentional about that design, just like as Robert described.
Yeah,
And,
that's
and
great.
Chris, I'm just curious. There's things that I've observed, and then from the exhibit side, I've observed, and I find that kids are better at certain kinds of pattern recognition or finding things that I think as people get older, we are better and better at filtering, so we then miss things. And so
Totally.
that openness that kids have can sometimes be, that can be their superpower sometimes that we can show off.
I I love your yes, yes, I
Yeah.
completely agree. Like looking at them,
Okay.
I'm gonna go back. I'm a big fan of ponds and macroinvertebrates, which are the little like things that you don't want to know live in the water all the time when you're swimming in a pond. Maybe, but it's amazing how skilled children are kids can see
Hmm.
those
Yeah, see,
differences.
that's, yeah.
Like when we say, look, key into how many this, how many that, like, what do you see? What do you notice the difference between these two aquatic insects? Like they can really focus in on that. And it's hard. And then parents will, oh, now I see it. Now I see it. Or even like different bird songs. Oftentimes, kids will notice the differences in some of the pattern in bird song before, a non-trained adult ear will notice that. So you're absolutely right. We absolutely see that, which again
And
is really cool.
yeah, yeah. One of those universal programs that almost anybody can implement is a good scavenger hunt, and that can
Yes.
often put kids and adults on a similar
Yeah.
footing.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I like hanging out with kids sometimes a lot more than I like hanging out with grown-ups. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, I mean, and I think it's really about directing, and giving kids that opportunity to shine. So, um, I'm curious if you have any do you have any like things that have not gone well?
Sure.
In the case of, to be totally open and you guys are like the big you're I
Mhm.
think many of the organizations in the heritage area are not as well resourced perhaps as your organizations, and so in terms of like trying and failing and learning, which is what one does when one fails, or doesn't succeed, I guess. Do you have any examples of things that haven't worked out?
Oh, I would say plenty of programs that we thought were going to knock it out of the park and zero registrations.
There you go.
I think to your point, it's so important. I mean, again, you don't want to test something so many times because that's resources, right? That's program design resources. Um, so I do think you have to be open to testing. Absolutely. And I think you also have to be really open to asking for feedback. Like, it's great to let people know, like, oh, this is a new activity. What do you think about it? And also sometimes it's helpful to bring a second person, like, to actually observe the program because the person who's teaching it, like, you're in. If you're really in and you're really in and you're not going to see a lot, you can't like be on the dance floor and on the balcony at the same time. So bring someone in to observe the program and actually note like, oh, people seemed really engaged here. I noticed that a few parents like, were really confused in how to help the kids with them here. So that can be really helpful. If you have an extra set of hands, do some observation of the programs just to notice how people are leaning in or stepping back, because that can help improve program design. And just like you mentioned in the very beginning, and like Robert mentioned, like do some research if you can. Send out a quick, you've got constituents that care about your location, no matter how big or how small. Hey, we're thinking about offering some family education opportunities, family experiences. We don't quite know. We've got a few ideas. Can you give us some feedback? Would you come in for a focus group? We'll have some snacks. We just want to hear from you. Like nothing is more valuable from hearing directly from your constituents. Like zero is more valuable than that. So all of those things that we've talked about, I would recommend.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, any feedback you can get, and don't be afraid to listen to fellow staff members or ask
Mhm.
friends. And then it's not a question of, do you think this is a good idea? The question is, would you come to this program? Would you take time to come to this program? And be open to the honest answer of, that sounds cool. No, I'm not coming. So because that's really what you want to know, right? Is whether or not people will really show up. We have also done programs that just haven't really sparked people's imagination, or they've been too long, or we've tried some paid programs and that was a little trick, just harder for our audience. And I think the main thing is like give up and do something different. Like be willing. You should always be willing to let go if it's, because I think when we did the our big grant on family programming, a national leadership grant, we experimented with a bunch of programs, and really it was only a couple that ended up coming out the other end. And many of them were programs we thought would work, but we were able to use that money um, in order to experiment a bunch, which I get that most people can't do. On the other hand, it did teach us to be way faster, I think, at letting go of ideas that weren't really working.
And I will mention that, and I know Desiree will probably mention this too, that Freedom's Way does do grant funding for education programming. So if this is something that you're thinking about, definitely definitely consider that. And I'm think we're kind of coming toward the end, and I'm so grateful to both of you for sharing your expertise. I want to mention, and this will be also included in some of the resources that we're going to share related to family programming, is that through that leadership grant, Constitution Museum has created this amazing website called Engage Families that walks through a lot of the strategies that they use in developing programs and exhibits. It's like a go-to resource that I refer to again and again. And that's, I will say, that is something that your federal funding for museums and libraries does. It doesn't just help a museum do something. Part of the outcome is they create these amazing resources that are for everyone to use. So kudos to that. And I do think just looking at the Mass Audubon website and seeing kind of the breadth and types of programming that they offer is certainly inspirational. Really quick, I'm going to do my walk-off slide for this section. So I'm bookending our talk today appropriately. Have a role for everyone in your family. Emphasize co-learning. Really try to get everyone involved. I changed it. I think it had said old somewhere. I was like, older. And I think this really, and we really got into this, is really tapping the creativity and freedom of young minds. They haven't been beaten down by society and all our rules. They are looking and seeing things, and they're open in ways that have so much potential for our programs, and it helps our older folks connect with that side of themselves that maybe they haven't had a chance to connect to. And I think this, again, putting kids and adults on the same level, finding ways, but also I think finding ways where, as we mentioned, where the kid can feel like the expert, and then the parent gets to learn, and sometimes when the parent gets to be the expert and the kid, and kind of changing roles. I remember going and visiting my kid's day camp with her and having her take us on a tour and being just like so amazed. It was a place I wasn't familiar with, and seeing her showing me around, and I was like, God, she's so grown up. Like she felt really empowered. And so finding ways to kind of empower our young kids to teach us is a really great opportunity that family programming offers to us. So I think we're going to wrap things up. Again, this video will be available to share, along with some resources. And here's Desiree.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. And thank you, Robert and Chris, for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today. And thanks to those in the audience for joining us. So as a reminder, there is one more webinar in this series that we hope you'll register for and/or share with colleagues and friends. The registration link will be in the chat momentarily, and that's also all accessible on our website, freedomsway.org. And as Elizabeth mentioned, we are pleased to share that the 2026 Freedom's Way Partnership Grant Program is launching October 1st. And it does include a funding category that supports educational programs and projects that may be a good fit for some of your organizations. Unfortunately, grants are limited to the organizations serving communities within the 45 towns and cities of the Freedom's Way National Heritage Area. Guidelines and additional information is live on our website at freedomsway.org/grants. And we encourage you to reach out at any time if you have questions or ideas. You can email us at grants@freedomsway.org. That concludes today's program. So again, we wish you well, and we hope to see you again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.